Before we get into tonight's stories, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I write these from New Jersey, and every time I see how far they travel, it genuinely surprises me. Let me know you're out there. Nobody checked the Polaroid for fingerprints at first, because when Callie Whitmore turned it over and saw her own face staring back at her, sitting in the office, headphones on, laptop open, the first thing the responding officer said was, "Where was this taken from?" And Callie looked at the angle, and she realized the photographer hadn't been across the parking lot. He hadn't been near the fence. He'd been standing right outside the window, close enough that if she'd looked up from her screen, she would have been looking directly into his eyes. The summer Callie turned 17, she got a job as a night shift pool attendant at the Briarfield Country Club in Draper, South Carolina. $12 an hour to babysit chlorine levels and lock gates. Her parents ran a small landscaping company. Money was fine, but never loose. And Callie was the kind of kid who kept a color-coded planner and a 3.8 GPA. Varsity swim, tutored middle schoolers in math on Tuesdays. She wasn't the type to sit still, which is why the job appealed to her. After the pool closed at 8, she'd test the water, run the vacuum line, lock the east and west gates, and then sit in the clubhouse office until midnight doing whatever she wanted. By 9 most nights, the parking lot was empty. The tennis court lights clicked off on a timer. By 10, she was alone on 15 acres of manicured nothing. She liked it. She'd bring her laptop, watch movies, eat gas station snacks. The silence felt like freedom. For 2.5 weeks, it was the easiest money she'd ever made. The towels were the first thing. Every night after close, Callie folded the leftover pool towels into a bin near the pump house. Club towels, white, thick, embroidered with the Briarfield crest. Standard. But 3 weeks in, she started finding a towel that wasn't a club towel. Thinner fabric, pale yellow, folded and placed on the same lounge chair every time. The one closest to the east fence, half hidden behind a row of hedges. And here's what bothered her. Not the towel itself, the folding. Every time, the corners were lined up perfectly, smoothed flat, centered on the chair like someone had taken their time with it. People don't fold towels like that by accident. That's not forgetting something at the pool. That's placing something. Deliberately. Almost politely. Like whoever left it wanted her to find it. She mentioned it to her manager, Dale. Dale was 50-something, sunburned year-round, and had the emotional range of a parking meter. He said it was probably a member bringing their own towel. Said he'd mention it. She waited for him to mention it. He never did. Then the East Gate. The East Gate had a keypad lock. Members got a code that changed monthly. Twice in 1 week, Callie found it unlatched during her midnight walkthrough. Not forced, not broken, just open. Like someone had punched in the code and hadn't pulled it shut behind them. She told Dale. Dale laughed. Not a mean laugh. Worse, a dismissive one. "You're 17, he said. "Every shadow looks like a serial killer when you're sitting alone at night." She didn't say anything after that. She just went back to work. And she spent the next 4 nights telling herself that Dale was probably right, that she was young and anxious and making something out of nothing. That was the first time she stopped trusting herself. It wouldn't be the last. The following Tuesday, around 10:30, Callie was in the office when the motion-activated floodlight over the pool deck clicked on. She looked at the security monitor. Briarfield had 4 cameras, all ancient, all grainy, The pool camera showed the deck lit up in flat white light. Nothing moved. She watched for 30 seconds. Then the light clicked off. She told herself it was a raccoon. She'd seen them before, waddling across the parking lot at night. Raccoons trigger motion lights. That's a normal thing that happens. Thursday, it happened again. This time, she made herself go outside. The air was thick and warm and still. She swept her flashlight across the deck, across the lounge chairs, across the hedges along the east fence. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Then she pointed the flashlight at the pool. The deck was dry. Every chair was dry. Every table was dry. The concrete was warm from the day and bone dry in every direction. Except for one spot. One bare footprint at the edge of the deep end. Still wet. Still drying in the heat. Leading nowhere. No trail of water coming from the pool. No second print. No wet towel nearby. Just a single bare foot pressed into the concrete. Fresh enough that she could see the arch and the individual toes. Her mouth went dry. She stopped breathing without realizing it. She went back inside. She locked the door. She called Dale. No answer. She sat in the office with her hand on her phone and her eyes on the monitor until her shift ended at midnight. Then she drove home 20 miles over the speed limit with every window locked. Dale called her back the next morning. "Probably a member who came for a late swim," he said. "Happens sometimes. Don't worry about it." Don't worry about it. 3 words. She heard them and felt something shift inside her chest. A small, quiet crack, like a bone settling wrong. Because she knew the footprint wasn't from a swimmer. There was no water trail, no second print, no wet chair. Just one foot, pressed once, like someone had stepped out of the darkness, touched the ground, and vanished. But Dale said, "Don't worry about it." And Dale was the adult, and she was 17. So she went back to work. She propped a chair against the office door. She kept the camera feed up on the monitor. She didn't bring her laptop. She didn't watch a movie. She just watched the screen. At 11:14, the motion light came on. And this time, she saw him. On the grainy feed, a man walked slowly across the pool deck. Swim trunks, no shirt. He moved calmly, like he belonged there. No hurry, no hesitation. He walked to the lounge chair by the east hedge, the same chair, sat down, and looked directly into the camera. Then he waved. Not frantic, not mocking. Just a small, easy wave. Like he was greeting someone he knew. Callie's hands were shaking so badly, she had to dial 911 twice. Police arrived in 9 minutes. The man was gone. The east gate was unlatched. On the lounge chair, they found a pale yellow towel, folded neatly, and underneath it, the Polaroid. Callie, in the office, headphones on, laptop screen glowing on her face, taken through the window, from outside, from close. She stared at the picture for a long time, because in the photo she looked comfortable, relaxed. She was smiling faintly at something on her screen. She looked like a girl who felt safe. And the person who took the picture had been standing right there. The investigation moved fast after that. The East Gate keypad logged every code entry. Records showed the same code had been used 41 times over a 6-week period, always between 9 and 11 at night. The code had been issued to a contractor who'd done tile work at the pool in April. That contractor had a son, 23 years old, living alone in a camper on a rural lot 12 miles from the club. When police searched the camper, they found more Polaroids. Dozens. Not just at the club. At the gas station where Callie bought her snacks. At the parking lot of the school where she tutored on Tuesdays. In the driveway of her parents' house. And here's the detail that made her stop eating for 3 days. The oldest photograph in the collection had been taken 4 days after she started the job. Before the towels. Before the gate. Before she'd even noticed anything was wrong. He'd already been watching. She just hadn't known yet. He had never spoken to her. Not once. She had never seen his face before the camera footage. He didn't have to speak to her. By the time she found the first towel, he already knew where she bought gas, where she tutored, where she slept. He knew everything about her life. She knew nothing about his. That asymmetry, the knowing and the not knowing, was the thing she couldn't put down. Not the photographs, not the waving. The fact that someone had built an entire architecture of surveillance around her daily life, and she'd moved through it every single day without feeling a thing. He pleaded guilty to stalking and criminal trespassing. He served 14 months. Dale was fired. The club settled quietly. Callie quit the job and never swam competitively again. Years later, she gave a statement at a campus safety panel. She said the part everyone remembers. She said she could live with being watched. What she couldn't live with was counting the chances she'd had to save herself. The towels, the gate, the footprint, the motion light. Every single one had been real. Every single one had been a warning. And every time, someone told her not to worry about it. So she stopped worrying, and he got closer. The most dangerous thing anyone ever said to her wasn't a threat. It was 3 words from a man who was supposed to keep her safe. Don't worry about it. Becca called her grandmother on a Tuesday afternoon. She was sitting on the porch of a foreclosed house in Granton, Ohio, covered in wallpaper paste and drywall dust, and she asked a question she never expected to ask. "Grandma, did you ever lose anything strange when you lived on Meridian?" Her grandmother laughed. The easy, unbothered laugh of a woman who'd lived 81 years without once suspecting what had happened inside her own home. "Just little things," she said. "A silver thimble, a photograph of your grandfather. I always figured I'd misplaced them." She hadn't. In the summer of 2014, 3 college students took a job renovating a foreclosed house at 412 Meridian Lane. Ryan Lusk, Becca Tavares, and Miles Okoro. All going into their junior year at a state school about 40 minutes from Granton. A friend of Ryan's uncle had bought the property at auction for $60,000. Previous owner deceased. No family. Bank took it. The plan was simple. Gut the interior, brighten it up, flip it by fall. Ryan was the one who'd organized the gig. He was the kind of guy who always had a side hustle, selling refurbished sneakers, mowing lawns, finding cash jobs through people who knew people. Becca was an education major who spent too much money on iced coffee and kept a collection of houseplants she talked to by name. Miles was pre-law, quiet, the one who always drove because he was the only one with a car that didn't overheat on the highway. The job paid $15 an hour, cash, no contract. Show up at 8, tear things apart, leave at 4. They'd blast music from a portable speaker, eat lunch on the porch, argue about whether the house was haunted. It wasn't. It was worse. The house had been empty for 2 years. It smelled like mildew and old carpet and something faintly sweet that none of them could identify. The wallpaper in the upstairs hallway was peeling at the edges, bubbling where moisture had gotten behind it. Becca took the wallpaper. Ryan took the basement. Miles took the kitchen floor. The first week was fine. Hot, dirty, normal. The wallpaper was the first thing. Becca was working the steamer along the upstairs hall, pulling long strips of faded floral print off the plaster, when she noticed writing on the back of one of the strips. Not on the wall, on the paper itself. Small, cramped handwriting in blue ballpoint pen. She peeled the whole strip and held it up to the window light. 7:14, 11:02, 3:38, 9:51, just times. Dozens of them. No dates, no labels, no context. Just timestamps. Written in a tight, precise hand, running down the back of the wallpaper in a single column. At first, she thought it was a medication schedule. Some elderly person's system for tracking pills. That made sense. Old man living alone. Keeping notes in strange places. That was a thing people did. It wasn't a medication schedule. She showed it to Ryan. He took a photo. They both shrugged. They kept working. 2 days later, Miles was on his hands and knees pulling up linoleum in the kitchen. The adhesive had dried out years ago, and the tiles came up in brittle sheets. Underneath, the subfloor was unfinished plywood, stained and warped. One section of plywood was loose. Miles pried it up. Underneath was a plastic bag sealed with packing tape. Inside the bag was a stack of index cards, 36 of them. Each card had a name and a license plate number, all handwritten, all in the same cramped blue ink as the wallpaper. Miles held one up. Patricia Devlin, Ohio plate, Charlie Echo Foxtrot 7219. Ryan laughed. The nervous kind of laugh people use when something is strange enough to be funny, but not quite strange enough to be scary. Neighborhood watch psycho, he said. Miles put the cards in his backpack. Nobody mentioned them again that day. But that night, lying in bed, Miles pulled one out and looked at it. He couldn't explain why, but the handwriting bothered him. Not the content, the care. Every letter was deliberate. Every number perfectly formed. Whoever wrote these cards wasn't jotting things down in a hurry. They were building something, carefully, over time. He put the card back in the bag and told himself it didn't matter. The following Monday, Ryan was in the basement tearing out a section of drywall along the foundation. The house had a partial basement, low ceiling, concrete floor, the kind of space that smelled like standing water even when it was dry. He was working a crowbar along a seam when the tool broke through into empty space. Not a pipe chase, not insulation, a gap. A full gap between the foundation wall and a second interior wall that shouldn't have been there. Ryan stopped. He pulled away more drywall. The gap was about 2 feet deep and ran the length of the wall. He took out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and held it through the opening. There was a chair, a folding metal chair, set up in the middle of the gap, facing the interior wall. Ryan didn't move for a few seconds. He just looked at the chair. It was the kind you'd find at a church basement potluck. Gray metal, vinyl seat, slightly rusted at the joints. It was unfolded. It was positioned carefully, and it was facing a wall that someone had covered in paper. He almost called out to Becca and Miles, but something about the chair made him wait. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling of opening a door you know you're not supposed to open. The half second where your hand is on the knob and your brain is saying, you could still walk away. He didn't walk away. He squeezed through the opening and stepped into the gap. There wasn't enough room to stretch his legs. He couldn't stand fully upright. The ceiling pressed down and the walls pressed in, and the air was stale and close. Whoever sat in this chair didn't sit here because it was comfortable. They sat here because they wanted to be hidden. They wanted to stay. He looked at the wall in front of the chair. Newspaper clippings, dozens of them, all taped to the wall in neat rows, all from the Granton Weekly Courier, all from the obituary section. Ryan leaned closer. Each clipping had been annotated in the margins. Same blue ink, same cramped handwriting. Confirmed. Tuesday, 6 a.m. No dog. He read another. Husband travels, back door faces alley. Another. Window latch broken, does not lock. Ryan's hands had started shaking and he didn't notice until he tried to take a photo and the image came out blurred. He took it again. Then he squeezed back out of the wall, walked upstairs, and sat on the porch without saying anything for several minutes. Then he called the police. What investigators found behind that false wall took 3 days to fully catalog. In addition to the obituaries, there were hand-drawn maps of the surrounding neighborhood. Not rough sketches. Detailed renderings, accurate enough to show which houses had fences, which had security cameras, which had side doors that faced away from the street. Each map was annotated with the same blue pen. Entry points were circled, dogs were noted, work schedules were recorded, and there was a notebook. 97 pages. The first entry was dated March of 2009. The investigators didn't know what they were looking at immediately. The entries were short, clinical. A date, a time in, a time out, and a brief note. March 14th, 11:18 p.m., 12:04 a.m. Kitchen drawer, 1 steak knife. March 22nd, 10:41 p.m., 11:19 p.m. Bedroom dresser, left earring only. April 3rd, 11:55 p.m., 12:31 a.m. Photo album, 3rd page, wedding photo. Page after page, month after month. The last entry was dated 11 days before the old man died. It wasn't a diary, it was a schedule. A 3-year operating log, meticulous and calm, documenting every time Gerald Pruitt, 74 years old at the time of his death, had entered one of his neighbors' homes, not while they were on vacation, not while the houses were empty, while they were home, while they slept. 170 documented entries, 19 homes. Some houses he'd visited more than a dozen times. He entered through side doors and basement windows. He moved slowly. He took almost nothing, and that was the part that made investigators uneasy. Not the break-ins themselves, but what he chose to take. A single earring from a jewelry box. Not the pair, just one. A spoon from a silverware set. Not a fork, not a knife. One spoon. A photograph from the middle of an album. Not the first page, not the last. The middle. The one you wouldn't notice was gone for months, maybe years. He took things people would think they'd misplaced. Things they'd search for briefly and then forget. Things that would make them say, "I could have sworn I put that somewhere." He wasn't stealing from them. He was proving he'd been there, to himself. In a room behind a wall, sitting in a folding chair, updating a notebook that nobody would ever read. The license plate index cards were his tracking system. He cataloged the vehicles of every person on his block so he could confirm who was home and when. The timestamps on the wallpaper were his entry and exit times. 7:14. That was the time he walked into someone's kitchen. 11:02. That was the time he stood in someone's hallway. 3:38. That was the time he opened someone's bedroom door. One of the 19 homes on the list belonged to Becca's grandmother. Becca found the address in the notebook on the second day of the investigation. She recognized it before she read the street name, just the shape of the entry, the way the cross streets were described, the mention of the back porch with the uneven step. Gerald Pruitt had been inside her grandmother's house 8 times. The entries spanned 14 months. The notes were specific. Enters through kitchen, leaves window cracked for cat, does not lock side door after 9 p.m. One entry read, china cabinet, small thimble, silver, second shelf. That was the moment Becca stopped sleeping. Not because of what he'd taken, because of how many times her grandmother had gone to bed, pulled the covers up, closed her eyes, and fallen asleep in a house where a man had already been standing. 8 times. Maybe at the foot of the bed, maybe in the hallway. Maybe close enough that if she'd opened her eyes, she would have seen him. And she never knew. She never once woke up, never heard a door, never felt a floorboard shift. She lived in that house until 2011, then moved to a retirement community, healthy and happy and completely unaware that for over a year, she had not been sleeping alone. None of the 3 students finished the renovation. Ryan's uncle's friend hired a new crew. The house sold that October for $112,000. The listing mentioned new paint, new floors, and an updated kitchen. It did not mention Gerald Pruitt, or his chair, or the wall, or the notebook. Gerald Pruitt had died of natural causes in 2012. He was never charged. He was never investigated. He was buried in a county cemetery with a small stone that listed his name and dates and nothing else. The house still stands on Meridian Lane. Families have lived there ever since. Children have played in the yard. People have cooked dinner in the kitchen, where Miles found the index cards. Someone probably sleeps in the room directly above where the chair used to be. The hidden room is gone. The walls have been replaced. The newspaper clippings were taken into evidence and eventually filed away. But every now and then, someone in Granton remembers losing something small. A photograph, a button, a thimble. Something they could have sworn they'd put in a specific place. Something they looked for once and then let go. And most of them shrug and say, "I must have misplaced it." They probably did. Probably. On Jonah Reese's first day picking blueberries at Harlow Acres, he noticed something strange. Every worker took their lunch break in exactly the same place, a strip of packed dirt between the way station and an equipment barn at the south end of the property. Nobody sat under the oak trees near the road. Nobody walked to the gas station a quarter mile up the highway. Nobody left. At first, he thought it was because they didn't have cars. The summer between high school and college, Jonah took the job because his parents told him to. Not asked, told. His father had grown up on a cattle ranch outside Abilene, and he had a deep, non-negotiable belief that a young man should understand what labor felt like before he went off to a university to sit in chairs and think about things. Jonah was 18, quiet, a cross-country runner built like a tent pole. He'd grown up in a suburb of Houston, and the most physically demanding thing he'd ever done was mow his parents' lawn in August. Harlow Acres was a commercial blueberry operation in the flat country south of Beaumont. 2,200 acres. Rows so long you couldn't see the end of them in the morning haze. The farm hired seasonal pickers every June through August, mostly local high school kids and migrant workers, and paid by the flat. A fast picker could clear $90, maybe $100 a day. A slow one could clear just enough to make it not worth the sunburn. The farm was run by a man named Garrett Harlow, third generation, mid-50s. Big guy, deep tan, the kind of permanent squint that comes from 40 years of staring across open fields. And here's the thing about Garrett. He was likable, genuinely likable. On Jonah's first morning, Garrett walked him through the rows personally, showed him how to cup the berry clusters and roll them off the stem without bruising, handed him a cold bottle of water from a cooler he carried in the bed of his truck. "You're gonna hate the first 3 days," Garrett said. "After that, your hands figure it out." He asked Jonah about college, asked where he was going, what he planned to study, remembered his name the next morning without being reminded. On the third day, Garrett brought Jonah a baseball cap with the Harlow Acres logo on it and said, "You're burning. Wear this." Jonah thought he was the best boss he'd ever had. He would think about that sentence a lot in the months that followed. The crew was about 25 people. The local kids, 5 or 6 high schoolers, mostly white, stayed in a loose group at one end of the rows. They drove themselves to the farm, weighed in with Garrett's son Tyler, and left at 2. They joked around, compared flat counts, argued about music. The rest of the crew was different. They arrived together in a white 15-passenger van that Garrett drove himself every morning. They picked faster and quieter than anyone else. They didn't talk to the local kids. They didn't talk much to each other either. At lunch, they sat together in the same strip of dirt by the equipment barn, eating from plastic bags. And when Garrett's truck rolled past, several of them looked down, not away. Down, like they were trying to become smaller. Jonah noticed it on day 2. He mentioned it to another local kid named Devin, who'd worked at Harlow Acres the previous summer. "Why don't they ever leave for lunch?" Jonah asked. Devin shrugged. "They just don't." "Don't they have cars?" "I don't think so." "Where do they go at night?" Devin looked at him for a second. Then he said something Jonah would think about for years. "I don't know. I stopped asking last summer." Jonah waited for him to explain. He didn't. On day 6, Jonah was picking in a row next to a woman he'd seen every morning since he started. She was mid-30s, thin, dark hair pulled back tight. She was the fastest picker on the crew. Her hands moved through the bushes like they were reading Braille, precise, automatic, relentless. She could fill a flat in the time it took Jonah to fill half of one. He said good morning to her. She nodded, but didn't speak. At weigh-in that afternoon, Jonah watched her bring her flats to the station. She had 14. He counted. At the posted rate, that was about $105. Garrett took her flats, looked at them, wrote something on the log sheet, and handed it back. The woman glanced at the number. Her expression didn't change. She picked up an empty flat and walked back toward the rows. Jonah did the math that night. 14 flats at $7.50 each was $105. He'd overheard another picker say she'd been paid $60. He figured he'd miscounted. But the next day, he counted again. 16 flats. He watched Garrett write the number. He couldn't see it from where he stood, but the woman's face when she read it told him enough. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't angry. She looked like someone who had stopped expecting the number to be right a long time ago. On day 10, Jonah dropped his water bottle near the van. He walked over to pick it up and glanced inside. The seats were worn. The floor was covered in dirt and berry stains. Hanging from the rearview mirror was an air freshener shaped like a pine tree, so old it had faded to white. On the dashboard, in a neat stack, were 6 cell phones. Not charging, not plugged in, just stacked. Screens down, like someone had collected them. Jonah stared at them for a few seconds. Then Garrett's voice came from behind him. "Forget something?" Jonah turned. Garrett was smiling. Easy, friendly, holding 2 bottles of water. "Dropped my bottle," Jonah said. Garrett handed him a fresh one. "Stay hydrated. It's gonna hit 104 today." Jonah took the water. He didn't ask about the phones. He didn't know why. Something about the way Garrett was standing, relaxed, unhurried, positioned exactly between Jonah and the van, made the question feel like a door he wasn't supposed to open. On day 13, a woman named Elena didn't show up. Jonah had never spoken to her, but he recognized her. She was young, maybe 19, maybe 20, and she always wore a green bandana over her hair. She picked in the row closest to the tree line, and she was one of the only workers who occasionally smiled. She wasn't in the van that morning. She wasn't at lunch. She wasn't at weigh-in. Jonah asked Garrett about her. Garrett didn't hesitate. "She quit," he said. "Happens every season. Some people can't handle the heat." He said it the way you'd say, "It might rain tomorrow." No wait, no pause, just information. That afternoon, Jonah walked past the equipment barn and stopped. Elena's green bandana was hanging from a nail on the wall, right where she always left it during weigh-in. Still knotted, still damp at the edges from the morning's sweat. She hadn't come back for it. People who quit take their things. They pack a bag. They say goodbye to someone. They don't leave a piece of themselves hanging on a nail in a place they never plan to return to. Unless they weren't planning to leave at all. On day 14, Jonah found the shed. He'd gone looking for a water refill near the equipment barn. Past the barn, half hidden behind a stand of mesquite trees, was a smaller outbuilding he hadn't noticed before. It was corrugated metal, no windows, and the door was propped open with a cinder block. He heard a radio, faint, playing something in Spanish. He walked to the door and looked inside. 8 cots, metal frames, thin mattresses, packed into a space the size of a 2-car garage. A single box fan in the corner, barely turning. The air was thick and hot and smelled like sweat and instant coffee and something vegetal. Overripe fruit, maybe, or damp cloth that hadn't dried. Plastic bins with clothes lined one wall. A microwave sat on an upside-down bucket. A garden hose ran through a crack in the back wall to a utility sink stained brown at the basin. Taped to the wall above one of the cots were children's drawings. Crayon houses, stick figure families, a yellow sun. 3 people were inside. 2 men sitting on cots, and the woman from the rows, the fast picker. She was standing near the sink holding a photograph. When Jonah appeared in the doorway, she slid the photograph behind her back in a single quick motion, like a reflex. Nobody spoke. Nobody asked why he was there. Nobody told him to leave. They just looked at him. The 2 men looked at him the way animals look at a sound they can't identify. still watchful, waiting to see what happens next. The woman looked at him differently. She looked at him like she was deciding whether he was safe. Jonah said, "Sorry, I was looking for water." Nobody answered. He stepped back from the door. His hands were shaking and he didn't understand why. Nothing had happened. Nobody had threatened him. Nobody had even raised their voice. But something about that room, the cots pushed together, the hose through the wall, the children's drawings taped above a bed in a windowless metal box, made his chest feel tight in a way he couldn't explain. He walked back to the rows and picked berries for 3 more hours without speaking to anyone. On day 16, Jonah tried again with the woman from the rows. Her name was Marisol. It took 2 days of small talk before she'd say more than a few words. She spoke English carefully, precisely, like someone who'd learned it from television and practiced it alone. She was from Veracruz. She had 2 daughters. The drawings on the wall were theirs. Jonah asked her about the pay. She told him quickly, looking over her shoulder. Garrett charged the workers who stayed in the shed $200 a week for the cots. He deducted it from their pay. He also deducted for transportation, the van, and for supplies, which meant the flats, the buckets, and the water jugs they used to pick. After deductions, some weeks she took home less than $40 for 6 days in 100-degree heat. Jonah felt his stomach tighten. "Why don't you just leave?" he said. Marisol looked at him, not with anger, with something closer to patience. The way you'd look at someone who asked why you didn't just walk out of a locked room. "Leave with what?" she said. He didn't understand. "My passport," she said. "My ID. He keeps them. He says it's for safekeeping." She paused. "He says he'll return them at the end of the season." "When does the season end?" She almost smiled. "It depends on Garrett." Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Can you call your family?" Marisol looked toward the van, parked in the shade by the way station, windows up, dashboard invisible from where they stood. "My phone," she said. "Garrett has it." Jonah remembered the stack on the dashboard. 6 phones, screens down. He'd thought of them as objects. Now each one had a person attached to it. A person with daughters, a person who couldn't call them. The next morning, something happened that Jonah couldn't explain. He was picking in the east rows, 2 rows over from Marisol. Garrett drove by in his truck, slowed, and leaned out the window. "So you're studying business, huh?" Garrett said. Friendly, conversational. "Good field, lot of opportunity." Jonah's hands stopped moving. He had told Marisol he was studying business. On day 16, in the rows. He had never told Garrett. Garrett smiled and drove on. Jonah couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed in his parents' air-conditioned house 40 minutes from the farm and stared at the ceiling and tried to organize what he knew. The phones on the dashboard. The workers who never left the property. Elena, who quit without taking her bandana. The shed with no windows. The deductions that turned $100 into $40. The passports in a filing cabinet. And Garrett knowing something Jonah had only told Marisol. He kept coming back to Garrett. Garrett with the cold water. Garrett who remembered his name. Garrett who smiled and said, "Stay hydrated," while standing between Jonah and a van full of confiscated phones. That was the part that scared him most. Not the shed, not the deductions, the smile, the easy, practiced warmth of a man who brought you a baseball cap on your 3rd day and kept 11 passports in a locked drawer. On day 18, Jonah asked Devin one more question. They were sitting on the tailgate of Devin's truck during lunch. Jonah asked, "Did you know about the shed?" Devin didn't answer right away. He unwrapped a granola bar and took a bite and chewed slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Did you know about the IDs?" Devin looked at the field. "It bothered me last summer," he said. "You stopped noticing after a while." Jonah waited. Devin said, "Garrett's family has been here forever. Everybody knows everybody. My dad buys mulch from him." He paused. "It's not like you can just say something." "Why not?" Devin looked at him the way Dale had looked at Callie. The way adults look at young people who still believe that noticing something wrong is the same as being able to fix it. "Because that's just how it works," Devin said. Jonah called his mother that night and told her everything. She called a legal aid hotline the next morning. By Friday, investigators from the Texas Workforce Commission and the Department of Labor were at Harlow Acres. Garrett saw the vehicles coming up the drive. Jonah was picking in the east rows and watched him walk out to meet them. He was smiling. He shook hands with two of the investigators. He offered them water from the cooler. Jonah watched him and thought, he's still doing it, even now. Even with federal investigators standing in his driveway. The warmth, the hospitality, the easy, generous performance of a man with nothing to hide. It almost worked. One of the investigators laughed at something Garrett said. Then they asked to see the outbuildings. What investigators found in the office took less than an hour to change everything. The filing cabinet. When investigators opened it, they found 11 passports, 8 state-issued identification cards, and 6 work authorization documents. Rubber-banded together, sorted alphabetically, stored in a hanging file folder labeled seasonal. Like office supplies. 11 passports in a hanging file folder, each one belonging to a person who couldn't leave the property without it. Each one belonging to a person who had been told it was being kept safe. Garrett Harlow was charged with labor trafficking, wage theft, and document servitude. His attorney argued the workers had come voluntarily and were free to leave at any time. The judge asked how someone without a passport, without a phone, without a car, and without more than $40 to their name was free to do anything. Garrett received 4 years. His son Tyler received 2 years of probation. Harlow Acres was shut down. The property was sold to a soybean cooperative. Marisol and several other workers were connected with legal advocacy organizations. Some received back wages, some didn't. The system moved slowly, and by the time settlements came through, several of the workers had moved on. To other farms, other states, other jobs that may or may not have been any different. Jonah started college that fall. He changed his major from business to social work in his second semester. But the thing he thought about most wasn't the shed. It wasn't the passports. It wasn't Garrett's smile or Devin's shrug or Marisol standing in a metal box holding a photograph of her daughters behind her back. It was something smaller. Months after the farm was shut down, Jonah was standing in a grocery store in College Station, Texas. He was in the produce section. He reached for a pint of blueberries and then stopped. He looked at the label, Product of Texas. And he realized he'd driven past Harlow Acres hundreds of times growing up. On the way to his grandparents' house, on the way to summer camp, on the way to cross-country meets. He'd seen the rows from the highway, green and endless and unremarkable, and he'd never once wondered who picked the berries. Nobody does. That's how it works. If these stories kept you up tonight, my psychological thriller audiobooks are on this channel. Full length, same dark tone. Completely free. Start with Perfect Sister. When I See You, nurse Meg Simpson finds evidence that her fiancé and sister are hiding something. Her search for the truth becomes an obsession that threatens to destroy everyone she loves. Link in the description.